The camera opens on a cold, black sky over the western frontier. It's just past midnight local time, and the horizon is a thin, nervous line of orange. A low rumble swells, then splits the night. 1, 2, 3 shockwaves roll across sleeping neighborhoods and fallow fields. A bright blossom punches upward from the industrial zone, throwing jagged shadows of cranes and pipelines onto the haze. Air defense radars blink and sweep, searching for ghosts that are already gone. At approximately 22:31 UTC on October 21st, 2025, 0031 in Stockholm, Ukraine's long arm reached deep into Russia and set a key chemical industrial complex on fire. The weapon? Storm Shadow. The target? A facility reported to make gunpowder, explosives, and components for rocket fuel that feed Moscow's war machine. The impact? Flames, secondary detonations, and an operational shutdown that even local officials, trying to play it cool, couldn't wave away. Here's where it gets interesting. Kiev says this was a massive combined missile and airstrike, not a lucky one-off. Russian regional authorities acknowledged the attack, then immediately tried the familiar no casualties, no damage line. Awkward, given the firelight flickering in the distance and the sirens that followed. Moscow's defense ministry boasted about intercepting swarms of drones. Ukraine highlighted that storm shadows, launched from aircraft, punched through the air defenses anyway. Both may be true in part. The difference is, only one side had a factory burning behind it. To understand why this matters, rewind. Storm Shadow, also known as SCALP in French service, is a Franco-British air-launched cruise missile built to do exactly this kind of job. Slip under radar, follow terrain at low altitude, and finish with an infrared scene-matching terminal phase that puts steel precisely where planners want it. The missile carries a BROACH tandem warhead designed to punch into hardened structures before the main charge detonates. In other words, it's not a sledgehammer. It's a key that opens the door and then brings the house down. Range, roughly 250 kilometers or more, depending on profile and release conditions. For Ukraine, that reach turns previously safe rear areas into legitimate targets. Operationally, imagine the profile. A pair of Ukrainian Su-24M bombers, airframes old enough to have a favorite final record, but now carrying very 21st century teeth, slip to their launch boxes, with escorts and decoys shaping the radar picture. At standoff range, storm shadows drop, wings deploy, and the missiles hug the contours of the Earth. No dramatic contrails, no screaming dive. Just a steady, low, radar-dodging run toward a set of coordinates the planners have massaged with ISR feeds and terrain data. In the last seconds, the seeker compares what it sees to what it was told to expect, and the BROACH goes to work. That's how you make iron talk at midnight. Now, before you ask, how does this differ from ATACMS or GLSDB? Think of ATACMS as a baseball thrown fast and high on a ballistic arc, supersonic, fired from ground launchers, HIMARS/MLRS, and ranging up to about 300 kilometers, depending on variant. It gets there quickly and hits hard, but its trajectory is very different, as is the diplomatic baggage that comes with firing US-made ballistic missiles into Russia. GLSDB, by contrast, is a clever hybrid. A small diameter bomb mated to a rocket booster with roughly 150 kilometers of reach, accurate and flexible, but slower and easier to track than a dedicated stealthy cruise missile. Storm Shadow sits in between on the family tree, air-launched, terrain following, optimized to kill fixed, hardened nodes, with a stealthier profile and a bunker-busting punch. Back to the night of the strike. The target set wasn't random. This facility on the western side of Russia produces inputs you can't easily replace: propellants, powders, and energetic compounds that cascade through the ammo supply chain. Blow a crater in a rail yard and the trains detour. Damage a power plant and you can patch or reroute. But scorch specialized chemical processes and the bottleneck ripples into everything from artillery shells to rocket motors. That's what made this hit so surgical and so demoralizing for the people who thought distance equals safety. Even Russian channels spoke of industrial damage amid their claims of downed drones. Kyiv, for its part, emphasized that Storm Shadows penetrated the defenses and that the plant had to shut down operations. The smoke on the horizon did the rest of the talking. Pause and widen the frame. This isn't a one-night symphony. For months, Ukraine has been pushing a deep strike campaign against Russia's war economy. Oil and gas processing nodes, refineries, depots, and ammunition plants. Just days before this strike, Ukrainian drones set the world-scale Orenburg gas processing complex ablaze, forcing it to suspend intake and cascading into a production cut in Kazakhstan's Karachaganak field. A reminder that one well-placed hit can ripple across borders and balance sheets. Put simply, Kyiv is proving it can reach the sinews that feed the front. Here's where it gets even more interesting. The use of Storm Shadow against a deep interior target signals confidence in tactics, in integration, and in intelligence. Western analysis has long argued that Ukraine's long-range precision strike is maturing. Coordinated salvos, ISR-driven target selection, deception packages, and timing designed to saturate or wrong-foot Russian air defenses. Add to that a backdrop of NATO surveillance flights along the alliance's eastern periphery. Rivet Joint, Poseidon, and other platforms quietly harvesting the electromagnetic weather, and you start to see how a picture gets built, night after night, until the moment a mission planner says, "We have it." In Moscow, the reflex was predictable. Propagandists accused NATO of direct participation because the missiles were made in Britain and France, as if the factory had defaulted to self-combustion. Officially, Russia minimized the damage. Unofficially, they had a sky over the western frontier full of drones, alerts, and angry mayors. In London, the Prime Minister didn't take the bait, brushing off the "at war" narrative while standing by Kiev's right to self-defense. It's the same script we've seen for a year. Rhetoric on escalation, hedged admissions of strikes, and a quiet scramble to move more air defense units inland where the explosions keep happening. Every interceptor pulled back to protect a plant is one less missile over the front's trench line. And that, strategically, is the point. Let's talk about air defenses, because this hit pokes a tender nerve. Russia layers its rear with S-300/400 batteries, Pantsir point defense, electronic warfare, and radar pickets. But the geometry is brutal. You can't defend 1,000 kilometers of factories, depots, and power hubs with a finite stock of missiles, and crews already exhausted by nightly drone raids. Cruise missiles like Storm Shadow exploit seams, terrain masking, dead ground behind radar horizons, and saturation when drones swarm other sectors. The defender is forced to guess where to wait coverage and when the real strike will come. One bad guess, and suddenly there's a hole in the propellant pipeline. Meanwhile, on the Ukrainian side, morale gets a boost that no speech can buy. There's a psychological dividend to showing that the enemy's deep rear isn't deep enough. When workers in a munitions plant, hundreds of kilometers from the border, have to check air raid alerts and evacuation routes, the war stops being an abstract news crawl and becomes a workplace safety briefing with explosions. That chills production, complicates shifts, and erodes confidence. It also reminds Russian elites who signed off on the war that their country is not insulated from consequences. If you're an insurance underwriter in Moscow, your calculator is now sweating. Here's a quick operational reality check, minus the romance. The likely launch platform here is Ukraine's Su-24M, modified, wired, and tested in the crucible of the last 2 years. The jet doesn't need to get near the target. It needs to get Storm Shadow into the air at the right point. After that, the missile's low observable shaping and navigation stack, INS/GPS, terrain reference, and an imaging infrared seeker take over. The BROACH warhead is purpose-built for hard targets like bunkers, reinforced concrete halls, and thick-walled chemical production units. When you're dealing with energetic materials, you don't have to hit the bullseye to ruin someone's week. But Storm Shadow is designed to do exactly that. Let's stack this against other Deep Strike episodes to see the through line. Ukraine hit Orenburg with drones and forced a gas giant to blink. It struck ammunition depots in Tula and hammered infrastructure in occupied Crimea with mixed salvos that included Storm Shadow and Neptune. Each operation peels back the myth of a secure rear area and forces Russia to choose: protect the heartland or the front line. There isn't enough kit to do both at scale. Move batteries inland to cover factories, and you thin the umbrella over advancing units. Keep them at the front, and another plant learns what BROACH means the hard way. Pause for a bit of dark irony. Russia's propagandists spent months mocking Storm Shadow as old and overrated. Old? The Beatles are old. Storm Shadow is a middle-aged professional with a gym membership and a very specialized resume. Overrated? Tell that to a plant manager staring at a control room lit by emergency exit signs. If there's a punchline here, it's that a British-French missile and a Soviet-era bomber just teamed up like a classic buddy cop movie, and the only ones laughing are the editors cutting the B-roll. Geopolitically, this strike lands in a volatile moment. Western debates about escalation have shifted from whether Ukraine should hit inside Russia to how far, how often, and with what. The UK opened the Storm Shadow lane last year. France matched with SCALP. US policy on ATACMS has seesawed, but the broader trajectory among Kiev's backers favours deeper reach with tighter targeting based on richer ISR. There are even public hints of expanded intelligence support for energy sector targeting to maximise pressure on Russia's war economy, a logical pairing with Ukraine's growing portfolio of indigenous long-range systems. The Bryansk area blast slots neatly into that playbook. What does it do to the ammo supply chain? Think upstream. Propellants and explosives don't just flow to shells. They feed rocket motors, fuses, and specialty munitions. Interrupt the chemical precursors, and you force expensive workarounds. Import substitutes under sanction-dodging schemes. Reroute production to less efficient plants, or cannibalize stockpiles earmarked for peacetime industries. Each workaround is time, money, and political risk. Meanwhile, Ukraine buys time on the front, raises Russian transportation costs, and increases the chance that rushed, lower-quality batches make it to the battlefield with higher dud rates or more handling accidents. War is logistics. Logistics are chemistry. Chemistry hates explosions in the wrong room. Let's also draw the doctrinal line. Western deterrence theory sits on a tripod: deny, punish, and assure. Denial means stopping spearheads and missiles. Punishment means hitting the supply lines, the depots, the industrial lungs of an adversary. Assurance means signaling resolve to friends and foes. A Storm Shadow ripping into a propellant hull is punishment in textbook form. It tells Russian planners that they can't outbuild the problem if their factories can't run predictably. It tells Ukrainians and their allies that the deep rear is now contested space. And it whispers to fence-sitters that backing Kyiv yields tangible strategic results. That kind of signaling matters as much as the crater. Here's a sober comparison pass, because acronyms can blur. ATACMS is a US tactical ballistic missile, fast, steep, and fired from ground launchers. Wonderful for time-sensitive targets and airfield attacks, with variants up to roughly 300 kilometers. GLSDB is clever and flexible at around 150 kilometers, but slower. Imagine a surgeon's scalpel delivered by paraglider. Storm Shadow is the stealthy crowbar for fixed, hardened nodes, launched from aircraft, threading valleys and riverbeds before breaking things that are expensive to replace. Ukraine needs all three types of arrows in the quiver. On this night, it chose the one that makes chemistry scream. Russia's reaction, beyond the talking points, will be to shift assets, harden nodes, and rotate in fresh air defense crews to watch more empty sky. Expect more decoys, more camouflage, and probably more angry calls to regional bosses whose factories now have outage plans. Expect, too, retaliatory missile and drone barrages against Ukrainian cities. Moscow's grim habit of trying to trade pain for pain. Kyiv's bet is that its layered air defense can ride out those waves, while its own deep strike campaign bleeds the gears that keep those waves coming. So far, the balance sheet favors the patient striker. There is a domestic Russian angle we can't ignore: the illusion of safety. The idea that the war is a TV event curated by studio lights evaporates when the night smells like nitrate and smoke. Workers don't volunteer for 12-hour shifts under air raid alerts. Managers don't hit quarterly targets while sweeping glass out of turbine halls. And governors don't enjoy explaining why Western Russia keeps lighting up on telegram maps. The Kremlin will pressure plants to restore operations quickly. Some will, on paper, but every day a factory runs on backup power or with half its sensor suite replaced from a cousin factory 1,000 kilometers away is a day Russia's war machine breathes a little shallower. For Ukraine, the messaging writes itself. In public, we can reach what feeds your army, and we will. In private, keep moving those S-300s home. It makes our infantry's life easier. For allies, the night over the Bryansk hinterland is a case study in return on investment. Provide standoff munitions, enable ISR, align political permissions, and the results don't just dent a warehouse, they compress an industrial ecosystem already under strain from sanctions, workforce shortages, and the physics of precision manufacturing. We should concede the risks. The escalation ladder is real, and Russia will keep rattling it. Accusations of NATO direct participation will accompany every British or French serial number that shows up in an impact photo. But escalation works both ways. If Ukraine's deep strikes push Russia to divert air defenses inland, the battlefield becomes less lethal for Ukrainian brigades holding the line. If they force Moscow to accelerate costly relocation and redundancy projects, that's money not spent on new armor or training cycles. War is a budget, and budgets hate fires. 2 last notes before we dim the lights. First, nights like this are data harvests. Every radar illumination, every SAM launch, every new decoy layout becomes a tweak for the next mission plan. Ukraine's Air Force and its partners will chew on those radar tapes and satellite frames and write better code for the next flight. Second, fear is cumulative. The first explosion is shocking. The fifth is policy. At some point, a plant manager's risk calculus becomes incompatible with smooth production, and on paper output becomes the only output Russia can reliably claim. So, what happened over the western frontier on October 21st wasn't just a big cinematic boom, it was a thesis statement. Ukraine can now hold at risk the factories that organize Russia's violence. It can do so with precision and with a mix of missiles and drones that impose a defense-in-depth problem Russia cannot solve everywhere at once. And it can do it again tomorrow, and the next night, and the next after that. Because the idea is not to win with one explosion. The idea is to make the other side exhaust itself trying to prevent the next one. When smoke rises over Bryansk, it's not just a factory burning. It's the illusion of safety inside Russia.